Sounding Crisis, the research project on climate change and sound.
Hi from Copenhagen. My name is Anja Mauruschat. Thank you very much for your interest in my research project. This is a recording of a revised version of the presentation which I gave to my colleagues at the musicology section of the Department for Arts and Cultural Studies at the University of Copenhagen on September 29, 2021. It was the first time that I presented my research to them, as my project had just started a few weeks earlier on September 1st. For the roundabout 20 minutes of my presentation, I therefore decided to focus on just one aspect of it, respectively to present to them the very first field research findings which I had gathered a few days earlier at the global climate strike in Copenhagen. But let me begin with some general background information on what I'm actually doing, and switch therefore to the slides and the headset. The title of my presentation is also the title of my research project. It is Sounding Crisis: Sonic Agency as Cognate Energies for Climate Action in Denmark/Greenland and Australia. The project is funded by the European Commission with a Marie Curie postdoc research fellowship and will be hosted for the next 2 years at the Sound Studies Lab of the University of Copenhagen. As the title already indicates, I'm interested in finding out more about the relationship between climate change, sound, and energies from an anthropological perspective. Thus, I will investigate indigenous and non-indigenous activists as well as artistic sound practices addressing the human-nature relationship in times of climate change. To narrow my research object down, I'm focusing on case studies from Denmark, Greenland, and Australia, where I'm also planning on field research trips in each of these places. My 3 main research questions are at this moment: in what way can my case studies be regarded as expressions of sonic agency? In what way can the various kinds of sonic agency of my case studies be regarded as expressions of alternative energies? What understanding can be gained from such a knowledge about alternative energies for the climate change discourse? One of the initial motivations for my project was a podcast, which I did with some students from the university and the art school of Potsdam, Germany, about a climate activist demonstration in Berlin in July 2019. At this rally, the Swedish student and activist Greta Thunberg gave one of her powerful speeches. Many Fridays for Future activists attended, and a lot of sounds and noises were supporting their claims for immediate climate action. Ever since, I'm interested in the soundscapes of protests of climate activists, which are one core aspect of my project. Therefore, I of course also attended the global climate strike on September 24th, 2021. I went to the biggest Danish rally, which took place in Copenhagen in front of the Danish parliament at Christiansborg Slotsplads. Here you can see some impressions of protesters and their signs, which I photographed. The rally was organized by a group of Fridays for Future activists, and according to the organizers, round about 2,000 students and activists from Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, and others joined the protests in Copenhagen that day. To understand the meaning of this demonstration, one also has to look at its contexts. This event on the 24th of September 2001 was the first global climate strike since the pandemic.
It took place 6 weeks after the publication of the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the urgency of keeping the rise in global temperatures to maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius, as well as at the end of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, 2 days before the general election in Germany, and 5 weeks before the so-called COP26, the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow in the United Kingdom. According to news and activist reports, thousands of students and their supporters participated in this global climate strike, from New Zealand via South Africa and Iceland to Canada. The material which I collected at the event in Copenhagen shows as first result the following findings. Fridays for Future is clearly a youth movement. The majority of the participants was approximately between 12 to 22 years old. Gender aspect plays an important role in this youth movement, as the majority of protesters most certainly might identify as female. Here is also a generational conflict at stake, as politicians were attacked by the teenagers as liars, and older generations were criticized for having failed and not acted at all to prevent climate change. The movement also has to be regarded as a self-help group for teenagers to combat fear, but also depression, as they told me. The experience of community and strength is intensified by speeches and singing chants and battle cries together. Social media like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and others plays an important role, especially for the global connection of the movement. And the teenagers seem to seek the experience of security, which could be translated into German as Geborgenheit or in Danish as Hygge, which was intensified by soft ambient-like music at this demonstration. In the following remainder of my presentation, I will illustrate these findings and try to put them into relation to the theoretical background of my research project. In fact, very few adults attended the rally on this Friday, September 24th in Copenhagen, mostly veterans from the peace and green movement of the 1980s, as it seemed to me. Instead, at this global climate strike organized by Fridays for Future activists, teenagers were predominantly present. They criticized in particular politicians like the Social Democrat Dan Jørgensen, who serves as Minister of Climate and Energy and Public Utilities in the current government of Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. As you can see on the photo, he is criticized by the protesters for downplaying the climate crisis by pretending that all is fine and climate change is no problem. Here you see the program which was developed by the teenage activists. The demonstration started at noon and lasted for 3 hours until 3 p.m. For this presentation, I am focusing on the soundscape of the last hour of the demonstration with its acoustic highlights and how it faded out. Here you see the Fridays for Future activist Hjalver, who gave the last speech that day. As she spoke Danish, I decided not to play an excerpt of her speech to you now, but I will give you a summary of her words. Instead, you can find an excerpt of 4 minutes from her speech and a translation of this excerpt in the blog post to this video on my website, soundingcrisis.eu. In her speech, Hjalver spoke about how the politicians called the protesters hysterical, probably also alluding to the fact that the majority of the teenage protesters are female and have rather high-pitched voices. She countered this kind of disease-mongering by criticizing in particular Dan Jørgensen, but also others of the older generations, that they didn't act much earlier and that now the whole task of fighting climate change and its ramifications has been left to her generation. In the remainder of her speech, Jelver explained how one could become a member of Fridays for Future and also referred to social media as an important tool for their activism. I have put together some examples of social media on 2 slides. On the first one, you see a selection of all the different social media channels which are used by the activists, from Twitter via Instagram to Facebook. And on the second slide, you see the photo of that particular rally to give you an impression of how many people attended. However, after her speech, which was supported by the clapping and the cheering of the other protesters, Jelver thanked the audience that she could speak to them. Then the 2 presenters, Hannah and Isabelle, thanked Jelver, and the whole assembly of the protesters in front of the stage started to chant in Danish, "We want to have a green and just future." The following slides, which I will show to you now, are supposed to give you a better impression of the development of the demonstration after Jelver's speech. So here you can see on the right-hand photo that there were megaphones on the stage, which were open for anyone to take. And here you see these 4 young ladies who took them and cheered up the crowd with their battle cries, and therefore I called them cheerleaders. And here you see some of those so-called kampråb, the battle cries. And the third one of these battle cries is, for example, the Danish translation of the famous Fridays for Future battle cry, "What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now." After the protesters had chanted in Danish together, "We want to have a green and just future," they continued with a very different kind of battle cry, supported by a certain movement, as I will show to you now in a short video.
Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid. Alle dem, der hopper, de vil have en fremtid.
As this was at the rather end of the demonstration, a lot of people had left already, but as you could see, the ones who stayed, they started to jump while singing, "All who are jumping want to have a future." All of the acoustic material which I just presented to you, the speech, the battle cries, and the singing and jumping, I regard as examples of a so-called sonic agency. The term sonic agency was coined by sound artist and theoretician Brandon LaBelle. His motivation for coming up with this term was to open up, quote, "sound studies toward the urgencies of contemporary life," end of quote. LaBelle defines sonic agency as, quote, "enabling new conceptualizations of the public sphere and expressions of emancipatory practices," end of quote. For my research project and interest, I revised his term with the help of epistemology as developed by Stephen Feld and with the help of anthropology of sound as developed by Holger Schulze. Unfortunately, I can't elaborate more on their concepts here and now. However, due to their considerations, I define sonic agency in respect of my needs as, quote, acoustic as well as electronically amplified and transmitted sounds as levers to the senses and creators of potential change. In contrast to the sonic agency of the activating and agitating speeches, chants, and noises, a different kind of agency, or maybe even better, a different kind of energy, could be observed at the end of the demonstration when the Danish band Aufori performed. Please listen to it for the next 1.5 minutes. What I find interesting here is that this is not at all any kind of agitating or even aggressive music as one might expect at a demonstration, but rather a very soft ambient-like music, which also might remind one of Billie Eilish and other musicians like her. Besides the peaceful atmosphere, which you just saw in the short video, I even saw that some of the teenagers were lying on the floor, cuddling with each other. As I'm interested in the energy aspect of sonic agency, I find also one quote from an interview which the two presenters and organizers, Hannah and Isabelle, gave to me of special interest. In this interview, I asked the two girls who met at the regular meetings of Danish Fridays for Future activists and quickly became best friends, how they see the development of the movement and how their teachers and fellow teenagers in their hometowns respond to their school strikes.
And that's going well, but the teachers are not supportive.
It's going kind of well. I think I've found all the climate activists in where I live, but there aren't very many climate activists. So,
what do you think about your chances, or if there are not so many people, how do you feel about the movement and about today too?
I feel very good about the movement. I think it's so strong and powerful, and we could really see that today. How many people and the really good energy. It was very overwhelming and nice, I think. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
You're satisfied with today?
So satisfied.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was so amazing, and it really felt like a success.
It was just like such an amazing energy, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
What I find interesting here is their use of the word energy to describe the special atmosphere of the demonstration. It fits quite well with my understanding of energies within the context of my research project. In contrast to the concept of energy in sources and systems of fossil fuel and power generation, I understand energies with sound and energy studies scholar Douglas Kahn as, quote, multifaceted and interrelated phenomena that emit sound and can be listened to in productive ways. End of quote. In other words, within my research project, sound is understood as an analytical point of access to the complex concept of energies. To sum it up, through listening to the acoustic material which I gathered at the first field research of my project at the Global Climate Strike in Copenhagen on September 24, 2021, I could observe different kinds of sonic agency, which also can be regarded as alternative energies which intermingle with each other. On the one hand, the crowd was activated by more or less aggressive battle cries, different noises like the beating of the drums and the cheering of other protesters. The teenagers also experienced empowerment through the possibility of raising their voices, speaking to the crowd, and expressing their anger and frustration in front of the Danish parliament. On the other hand, one also could observe a calming down of the crowd through ambient music and the longing for relatedness amongst the participants of the demonstration. The complexity of the interplay of these two main kinds of energies, let's call them activating and passivating energies, created the overall atmosphere of a positive energy, which Hannah and Isabelle described as, quote, a really good and an amazing energy, end of quote. Due to this experience, which was conveyed especially via the sound of voices, noises, and music, participants perceived the movement of the climate activists as strong and powerful. Therefore, I regard this case study of the largest Danish demonstration at the Global Climate Strike Rally 2021 as a very good example of the sonic agency of cognate energies for climate action. The next step of my research will now be to try to make more sense of this material and my first findings in comparison to other indigenous and non-indigenous activist and artistic sound practices and their sonic agency as cognate energies for climate action. Thank you very much for your interest. You can find more information on my project online on its website, soundingcrisis.eu. Of course, you are also very welcome to write to me in case you have any questions or feedback. My email address is anja.mauruschat@hum.ku.dk.